Nature lovers, happy Sunday, and welcome to the Restoring Our Roots podcast, which is the voice of the decriminalized nature movement. This podcast is a gathering space where we explore the wisdom of entheogenic plants and fungi, the beauty of natural healing, and the importance of reconnecting to the sacred earth. Every month, we'll hear from visionaries, healers, and advocates who are working with entheogenic plants and fungi and returning us to a balanced relationship with nature. My name is Larry Norris. I'm the co-founder of Decriminalized Nature and the National Organizing Director. In this role, I've had the privilege of helping numerous cities across the United States and globally to adopt policy to decriminalize entheogens. If you'd like to help and connect with the movement, please go to decriminalizenature.org. There'll be a little bit of information in the sheet there when you check out our podcast. I'm thrilled to co-host the Decriminalized Nature Restoring Our Roots podcast with our other board members who and we'll be going live every 2 weeks on Sundays. I would also like to introduce and I like this term that Rachel used earlier, the Tinkerbell in our ear. Rachel, who's been instrumental in bringing this project to life, helping us out, doing all the production on the backside. Thank you, Rachel, for all your efforts and inspiring this series. And Rachel is posting these episodes on Spotify and other platforms in the week or so following the live show. We're really happy today to have our guest today. Our guest today is Jamie Morey, who is a grassroots activist in Massachusetts and founder of Parents for Plant Medicine. And she sounds like she has a couple other fantastic new orgs she's going to tell us about today as well. She saw some of the inner workings of Massachusetts Issue 4 and some of the other challenges and benefits of working together on the grassroots there in Massachusetts. Actually, you're currently, as I understand, working on getting quite a few 10 different pieces of legislation into the Massachusetts state legislature. So that's pretty impressive. Love to hear about that process from you. I'd love to continue having these conversations. We've had so many great conversations, but now we get a really awesome platform so that other people can hear and enjoy the fun things we have to talk about. So how are you doing today, Jamie?
Be good. Thanks for having me. Happy
Yeah,
to be here.
thank you for being here. Yeah. Maybe we could start off with a little background, maybe a little bio. Tell us a little about yourself and maybe how you came to the incredible healing plant medicines that we're going to be talking about today.
Well, I had, when I was younger in my late, teens and very early 20s, I had lots of positive recreational experiences with mushrooms and LSD. Kind of stopped doing all that. Got married, had kids, and sort of hadn't really thought about plant medicines for decades until a couple years ago, when I just sort of hit a wall trying to find relief for my children who were suffering. So I have 4 kids. The oldest is 22 and started having some really serious mental health issues out of nowhere about 8 years ago, which threw us into the world of mental health, trying to, doing all the talk therapy the programs, and lots of pharmaceuticals, and but really getting nowhere. My kids were diagnosed with a neurological autoimmune disorder, which causes really severe physical and mental health issues. Treatment resistant depression was a really big one. And we ended up turning to IV ketamine for my son, which we could only afford because we got a treatment grant. I got him thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars in treatment grants, and spent almost all of it on ketamine. And ketamine was way more effective than any pharmaceutical we'd ever tried. But it's very, very expensive, even though it costs about $5. Each treatment was $650. And you need sort of 6 to 8 as the standard beginning course of treatment. And, we just blew through a lot of money. And I needed to find something else, that was that effective in treating my son. And that's when I started looking to psychedelics and all of the, amazing research that's out there that shows, the efficacy. I had never really thought of them, in a therapeutic way based on my own experiences, in my youth. But once I really started digging into the research, it just became really evident to me that this was the way forward, for my adult son. Cannabis, at the time also, cannabis has been it's been my medicine for years, super helpful for me. So when my son turned 18 and when my daughter turned 18 a couple of years later, I got them both their medical cannabis license, which was hugely beneficial for a lot of the symptoms that they had, issues around sleep and appetite and anxiety. And I would find that when I was speaking with other parents about, that had the same conditions that my kids did, and everybody swapping, like, what did you try for meds? If I would mention cannabis, even, which has been legal in the state since, 2017, um, it was like the stigma was still so strong. It really shocked me. And then forget about talking about psychedelics. People couldn't even hear that. So I started getting really frustrated at, the lack of relief that pharmaceuticals and traditional treatments were offering my adult children who had, been at it for many, many years, trying very hard. The side effects of these pharmaceuticals, the way they're just given out, almost like candy to children, the stigma at thinking outside of the box for treatments that, we science shows are beneficial. I just started getting really frustrated, and that's what led me to form a grassroots advocacy group, Parents for Plant Medicine, to start to speak up about the way these medicines are actually really helpful for parents, in trying to address their own trauma, addiction, depression, and also for parents like me who were searching for other solutions for our young adult children. So that's kind of what got me started on this path of advocacy. And that was the very beginning.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's such I imagine the dynamics, there's so many families like myself included, where just even the idea of talking about doing or having a parent who's supportive or, wants to have an experience with or is seeing these as really beneficial is like so rare. So I think, your children should be very happy for your support in that because yes, these can be very helpful. And I'm curious too, you kind of mentioned this a little bit with yours and then a little bit with theirs. We're constantly trying to figure out this mechanism of help. How is this helping? What's different about these than pharmaceuticals? Can you sort of tap in either from your own experiences or from what they're telling you about their experiences about how this has been helping them? I always really like to say, can we deconstruct mental health in a different way? Because what's happening here is not your sort of typical mental health mechanism. It's something else going on. Do you have any sort of insight into that from all the experiences you've seen?
Um, I mean, for us, it was the fact that they could get powerful relief without additional side effects. Like um, the pharmaceuticals weren't only not super effective, they just came with a list of problems that were often longer than the condition that they were, trying to treat. Um, that's what was so alarming about them to me. My son was put on a medication, when he was maybe 17, that carried the risk of lactation in males. My daughter was put on Zoloft at maybe 15, never suicidal, never had a suicidal thought in her life. And shortly after starting that, texted me on her way to school on the bus saying, "You need to come and pick me up. I have this really strong urge to kill myself."
Mm.
Um, which is horrifying. Like, thank God she felt like she could tell me that. So that's the biggest thing for me is that, cannabis doesn't carry those side effects. There are risks for sure. If you don't, like any medicine, if you don't use them appropriately, you might have an uncomfortable experience. But just the side effects and not having those, like wondering what is that doing to their developing brains. And of course, I know there's a lot of controversy around cannabis for developing brains too. But when you have a condition that needs some kind of medication, for me, I would rather turn to a plant rather than, something that has all of these way more harmful potential side effects. So that's a huge one.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Wow, yeah, it's always interesting when you see kind of the pushback from the anti-psychedelic crowd, and they say things like, "Oh, this might cause more suicidal ideation, et cetera, et cetera." And then you have these pharmaceutical companies that literally have tested it and found that to be the case. on their label as a warning, but yet those are okay and those are, allowed to be given by doctors. But there isn't really, the same sort of balance there. So I imagine that must have been really difficult as a parent to watch that happen as you're like trying to do the right way to help heal your children.
Even non psychiatric medications, actually, there's a lot, there's all this talk about, the potential harms for psychosis with both cannabis and psychedelics. But the worst experience I ever saw was when my son was put on prednisone, steroids. And there's a lot of people who have had psychotic reactions from being put on steroids, but there's not the same fear. We never got an explanation that this was a risk. And he was on a short burst of prednisone and had a hypomanic reaction, didn't sleep for 5 days. And then on the fifth night had a horrific night of hallucinations, which, has traumatized him to this day. So all this conversation around what can potentially happen with psychedelics, many of the same harms can come from medicines that are just prescribed with no warning.
Mhm.
So
Right, yeah. And you said
frustrating.
yeah, and then Sarah, to kind of like reflect back on kind of your experiences. You said a while ago you had a little bit more recreational experiences with mushrooms and LSD, and I'm guessing at some point in time in a place that was legal and time that was legal. There more recently, you've also had one and maybe more of a different kind of approach. Can you differentiate for folks like what's recreational for you, what's healing for you? Are they the same? There's a lot of people who say they can be kind of the same, or you can, I sometimes say you be on the dance floor and still get slapped upside the head with spirit. You just don't know. What's your thought about this sort of dynamic between recreational and therapeutic?
There's a lot of overlap sometimes, even though I wasn't approaching them from a therapeutic standpoint, when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I feel like they, I got a lot of benefit. I had um, a traumatic childhood with a lot of really painful things happen to me. And at that time, even though I didn't know it, I feel like I got a lot of relief from both cannabis and psychedelics. I feel like they definitely, psychedelics in particular, sort of changed my view on the world and society and sort of the path that I wanted to go down. I sort of remember sort of looking at critically at how people lived and that sort of quest for money and power and just feeling like that was kind of gross, as I was embarking on, like, what do I want to do for a career? What do I want to do for college? I just made sort of intentional decisions about the path that I wanted to take that I think were different. And I think, psychedelics had a part in that. Yeah, I think the overlap is I think it's interesting, in our society where alcohol is like a national pastime, and people are okay with that being, a recreational relief for stress. I just find that part so frustrating. Why people can see it's okay to use something to just help you relax and feel better and let your guard down when you're feeling anxious. Um, in the form of alcohol, which is, as we all know, is horrible for us. It's a toxin, it's a poison. Um, and yet psychedelics, we can only focus narrowly on, the mental health applications. And, a lot of people at very negative, views around even talking about how enjoyable of an experience it is. It's tremendously healing, but it's also pleasurable, and that's okay too.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there was even with the MAP study, didn't they say that they were critiquing MAPS for not adding adverse reactions, and one of those adverse reactions was joy or like ecstatic feeling and of ecstasy, that type of thing. Like somehow these are also then considered to be adverse reactions. I think you touched on something there which is interesting, and I know it's all speculation, of course, but it's fun to speculate sometimes about how these plants and mushrooms really helped you and other psychedelics really helped you sort of review the world at large, review the system that we're in. And a lot of people will say, well, that's the reason that they're illegal is because they're helping, and alcohol really doesn't really help you like be like, okay, what is the system I'm embedded in and how do I navigate this? It's just like, okay, I'm here, I'm gonna numb, so maybe can you speak to that dynamic a little bit?
Um, yeah, I think they are definitely eye-opening in a way that's alarming for some people. Alcohol numbs you for sure. Um, yeah, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
I oftentimes think,
I
I'm kind of was kind of leaning you a little bit just because oftentimes I think that as well as like, that's really at the core of the mental health too, which is like it allows us to review our narrative. It allows us to review why we're stuck in this situation. It allows us to review, issues or traumas or wounds or things that we have from a different lens, so that we can say, okay, wait, this is healable. I'm not stuck in this rut. And it seems like if we're talking about on a meta scale, not meta as in IG,
yeah,
Facebook, but meta as in like above perspective, it allows us also to see the rut we're in societally, culturally, and that type of thing. And oftentimes that rut is created to keep us in there, to keep us, in a place where we aren't able to sort of make those big changes happen and the oligarchies can continue to happen, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, this is such an interesting dynamic that I've seen this thread kind of pull through. And really, if we can kind of bring that into the conversation around mental health, then we're starting to have a new conversation. I oftentimes wonder though if some of that mental health authority doesn't like that because that's still part of that same system that benefits from us not seeing
right,
through, right? Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
I'll add that while I got into this looking for relief for, my adult children, and fought very hard throughout the Yes I'm For campaign, as well, trying to find relief for my husband, who is, we've been separated for 3 years, but together for 30 years. He is an Iraq veteran with severe, debilitating PTSD, which, destroyed our marriage, our family. And I, really leaned into pushing for, legal access to psychedelics for him because I knew it would help him so much with PTSD. The research there is, I don't really need to go into that. But for me, my way back to psychedelics personally, was in trying to start to heal myself and, from the trauma of a relationship ending after 30 years that was so important to me. My husband's mental health unraveling and affecting my whole family in a really dramatic way. Um, and I started microdosing, and that really helped me start to work through some of the grief that I had. And also, you know, I became aware that, my whole life has been spent trying to care for and heal and think about other people. And it really sort of brought me back to myself and to the wounds that I needed to heal, childhood stuff. And I think, like a lot of people, y- numbing with alcohol, not thinking deeply about, yourself, your past, where you want to go. Just not, I think I fell into the trap that so many of us do and just go, go, go and not ever really self reflecting. And I just feel like I've been on autopilot my whole life. And, once I had all these terrible tragedies, and started, microdosing and reflecting on myself, yeah, I just feel like I've been on autopilot for decades. And I'm finally starting to wake up, and psychedelics are playing a huge part in that. I was very, very lucky, back in March, to go on a retreat, a women's psilocybin trauma retreat down in Mexico, sponsored by the Hope Project, which is part of Heroic Hearts, and have a large experience, in an indigenous led ceremony that was, just absolutely transformative. So, while I got into psychedelic advocacy, searching for help and relief for others and their suffering, it's really let me see that I have a lot of work, like all of us do, to heal myself, and to start to to get in touch with, with how I want to be in the world and the things that I need to do differently. And, I know that I would never have been able to accomplish that through talk therapy, and the standard treatment. So the transformation that can occur through psychedelics is unlike anything we have. And
Mhm.
that's what led me, I was fighting for my kids and my husband, but once I felt for myself, really, really felt how powerful that could be, it made me want to fight all the, harder to bring
Mhm.
this medicine to everyone. And um, it just, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I mean, so you're doing so much great, obviously, work. And before we get into that, I just want to just touch on one more thing. It sounds like had a lot of benefit from microdosing, and you also had this really great retreat experience. Can you sort of compare and contrast the two? Like, how was each one helping you? What was sort of unique or different about each? What was this sort of retreat center? Is there a deeper experience, a different type of ceremony? What kind of connection did you have to the greater thing called consciousness, and then also with microdosing?
Yeah, microdosing, clearly was subtle,
Mm.
but hugely beneficial at the same time. Have always been, I think as a trauma response, a person who didn't cry. I was very tough and strong, and I just went and did, and I didn't think too much about this bad stuff. I just pushed it away. And um, it- microdosing, when I started microdosing, I could cry for the first time in a really long time. I could like sit a little bit with uncomfortable feelings in a way that I had never been able to do before. Like realize some things about myself that I needed to change. It was just like a little glimpse into the work that I like needed to start doing. The experience in Mexico was like sort of like blew the lid off of all that. And it was I, have a lot of trust issues with other people, as is pretty common, I think, when people have trauma. um I was a person who could never really do talk therapy, because I couldn't even access or connect to my own emotions, let alone like vocalize them to another person. And being vulnerable and talking about how I felt in front of a group of people, like you just never could have.
Mhm.
10 years ago, I would have laughed at you if if you told me that I ever would have been opening up about myself and how I felt in that way to a group of women. Um, it was just powerfully healing to be surrounded by other people who were making themselves vulnerable and sharing. It's but words kind of I have a hard time articulating how powerful that experience was. But it was life changing. Something I think everybody should have the opportunity to do. It also was to have the opportunity to heal in like an indigenous led ceremony, with those practices, just like a completely different framework. um, it's so unique and much better, I think, in a lot of ways than sort of the Western model of you're broken, you have a problem. You might get one person to support you. Maybe they'll throw some medicine at you. Um, it's very lonely, I think, in the U.S. It's sort of seen as like a personal problem that you have that you need to work out, and to have that experience of group healing was super powerful for me. And the idea of like a community of people trying to help you on your path,
Mm.
and like surround you with love and support, I think that's powerful medicine too.
Yeah, here oftentimes when people do group retreats, it's like I never knew anybody when I came in, and now I have five best friends. It's something about like in one night or a few nights, you can have so much growth and so much journey with other people that all of a sudden you're connecting in a deeper way, deeper level, even if you don't talk to the person for. I've seen people that I've done some ayahuasca ceremonies way back with 10 years later. We're still like, hey, how you doing? Like there's this deep connection because you've like went through it together, and I think that's just can be really powerful, and then supporting each other as you sort of rebuild through that process. You mentioned that there's some obviously some differences with sort of this indigenous led ceremony. What could you highlight any sort of, outside of being in a group setting and kind of feeling more connected to the community? Was there anything unique that was happening in these ceremonies that you're like, wow, that really worked well, or I didn't really know, like there's a sound that happened, and there's this one Ikaro I always hear, for example, and every time I hear it, I know I'm going to purge, and it's like, but I don't know what the words of the Ikaro though are, but for some reason it has that thing for me. So I'm like, okay, there's certain technologies that they understand about this setting. Did you see any sort of technologies, or highlight any sort of these framework instances you're speaking about that really work well and maybe could translate into your future practices?
Um, Nothing that comes to mind, right? Sorry, I I told you this, but I am operating on very little sleep. My kids, we have the stomach bug running rampant through my house, which is what I've been dealing with nonstop for the past week. So my brain is a little fried. Nothing in particular. I will say I was really shocked. This isn't a good answer to your question, but something that just I thought of. Um, was a nice benefit. I have always been not really in touch with the spiritual realm, or any. I was traumatized by religion growing up in the deep south, and felt I was disconnected from myself. I was disconnected from like the world at large and the spiritual realm. I have heard a lot about people having these spiritual experiences as part of their psychedelic experience, and I didn't really think that that would happen for me. I just feel like I have always felt like my brain is too scientific for that. I just don't really believe in that anything comes after. I was really shocked to have had like a huge spiritual awakening as well, and that connection to something beyond the here and now, and nature and the universe and my place, and like all of that um, was really overwhelming and an amazing piece of the whole experience for me.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, well, congratulations for that. Sounds like it was pretty impressive, and thank you for
Yeah,
sticking it out even with your rough last couple days. I really appreciate you being here and giving us your time and energy. But let's now get into the fun stuff that you've been
yeah.
excited about, all your advocacy work, all the incredible work you've been doing there in Massachusetts. You started off doing a lot of grassroots work, as you mentioned, a lot of grassroots policy, working with some local grassroots organizations. Maybe you want to talk about that, and then also the transition to Massachusetts issue 4, I believe. And then if you want to, and we'll go step by step, and then eventually we can jump into what you're doing on the legislative level.
So after Parents for Plant Medicine, I started, going up and speaking at the State House. I was connected with Bay Staters for Natural Medicine, which was a psychedelic advocacy group, the main one in Massachusetts, I would say for many years. I worked alongside them. I got approached by New Approach when they came to Massachusetts, and started the ballot effort there to join their team, which I reluctantly did. I was sort of vocally outspoken against them when they first came to Massachusetts around affordability in particular, because that, like I said at the beginning of this story, the lack of affordability for ketamine is sort of what led me down this path. Um, I decided to join that ballot campaign as the community engagement director because I felt like I really needed to do my best to get something passed in Massachusetts, to get it. I felt like it was the best option at that point because I knew um, if this ballot question failed, it would really set us back in Massachusetts, which sadly it has. But yeah, I decided reluctantly to join that campaign as the community engagement director. It was a lot of disappointment, and heartbreak along the way. I don't know if you want to dig into what went wrong, but
As much as you're open to digging into, that'd be just good for other people to sort of learn from what happened there.
yeah. I I think in Massachusetts we had a lot of problems, and one of them was that the Bay Staters for Natural Medicine, which was the psychedelic organization at the time, really the only one. New Approach tried to work with them. James Davis, the who pretty much is Bay Staters for Natural Medicine. There's no one else really involved, even though he tries to tried to make it appear that there was. He said he would partner with New Approach, sort of be their grassroots outreach, education. Took $35,000 for them, endorsed the ballot question, and then turned around and actively worked against them. He managed to cause a lot of problems for us in the course of the campaign. Not that he had policy differences. It wasn't really that. It was he was actively spreading misinformation. And he was quoted, in all of pretty much any article on this went to him for quotes, and he was intentionally, talking about the harms of mushrooms and the dangers of ibogaine, and really stoking fear, because he just had a personal beef with New Approach, and he said flat out that he wanted to sabotage this ballot question, and I think, he played a small role in that, unfortunately.
Yeah, real quick on that, I was surprised to see some of the rhetoric coming out of there, including him hooking up with the big time prohibitionist for cannabis, Kevin, was it Sabat or something like
So,
that?
yeah,
And then also going after home grow. It's like this is what we should all be behind, is like self-agency to grow your own plants and mushrooms and that type of thing. So it was very that when I saw that, I was like, what's going on there? Because these are things that should be standards for people that are doing this grassroots movement, and seeing him kind of come out and then bring in, you know, the prohibitionist onto his team was pretty quite surprising for me.
yeah, there was a lot of surprises in this campaign, but that was the most disappointing thing for me. I had broken ties with him over some really unethical behavior that I saw, some really alarming, and then illegal things. So I had already sort of stepped away. Um, but yeah, just the fact that he said things that I know ran counter to everything that he said previously, it was just, yeah, it was a mess. The opposition campaign, I mean, they really didn't have to do much. They spent $100,000 throughout the course of the campaign versus I don't remember how many millions New Approach spent at $8-9 million. They didn't have to do much because the groundwork has been laid for many decades. The fear, the stigma, like that's all there. But I was surprised at how much James played into stoking that. It was disappointing for sure.
Yeah.
Um, just not to get too into the nitty gritty, but I think a huge problem in this campaign was that the grassroots activists that were brought in to be part of the campaign, myself, Graham Moore, and it seemed that we were there for optics, more than for anything else, and that part was really disappointing.
Yeah,
I
there's
think there was.
disparity in other states as well, unfortunately, with regards to New Approach and how they sort of relate to the local community.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem, a big part of the problem was New Approach hired Dewey Square Group to run the campaign on the ground. They're a political strategy firm in Boston that runs political campaigns, ballot campaigns, but they didn't. They just don't know psychedelics. They're not people who've used them themselves. I think they just weren't really comfortable with the subject matter, and they were comfortable with the medical piece of it, the heavily regulated medical model. That's sort of what they wanted to focus on because it kind of fit with what they knew. And I think the messaging strategy that they chose was really problematic. They did not want to address directly a lot of things that needed to be addressed went over the public. They did not want to talk about decrim, which is really unfortunate. I think we should have used that in our, to our advantage. In Massachusetts, we have 8 decriminalized communities. I think that should have been front and center on a lot of the conversations. Most people in Massachusetts don't even know that there are 8 decriminalized communities in Massachusetts because it's such a non-issue. None of the potential harms that the opposition was saying, would happen, like none of them have played out in reality in any of these communities or, the states where it's legal, the many countries where it's legal. I think their inability to sell people on decrim was a huge part of the problem. Same with home cultivation. It was like the tactic was don't talk about the pieces of that are potentially problematic versus like let's educate people on why they're not that big of a deal. So yeah, home cultivation was a tough one. Ibogaine, they didn't really want to, talk about Ibogaine. So I just think this intentional strategy of just not addressing the tough points didn't really work. People felt deceived. We heard that a lot because the primary focus being on the regulated model and then sort of not even mentioning decrim people felt like we were trying to pull the wool over their eyes. So that was frustrating. And I think we didn't reach enough. I know we just didn't reach enough people. So, we didn't get our ads up until first, maybe second week in October. And in Massachusetts, early voting starts October 16th. So for all the money that we spent, we didn't, at the end of the day, we didn't reach enough people and we didn't tell them what they needed to hear to feel comfortable with voting yes.
It sounds to me like for other people out there that are listening and looking to do, similar stuff in their states, the key here is education. That strategy is important, but it sounds like education to the individual is really key here and don't shy away from the things that are, difficult. That's the opportunity to lean in and really sort of have that conversation and problem solve. And we saw this too a lot of times in some of the conversations that we've had in the past, where you'll have a lobbyist or a legislator will say, no, this is the way it's got to be, and everyone's like, well, they said the thing, and then we're like, did anyone even try to like talk to them about it, educate them, like just spend some time to like, okay, well, yes, but also here's what, like you said, we have 8 cities here that have passed. There's cities all across the US that have passed. Like you're not seeing this. It's been 5, 6 years now. You're not seeing this going on. So I think that's really, I think a key element. And that's where, again, not just giving face time to the local grassroots support, but actually engaging them in a good way, I think is important, because now you're going to be able to be the ones that are going to have those touch points. You don't have that sort of lobbyist veneer over you. You're really just like part of the community trying to help people understand a little bit more about this. So I think that's a good insight in terms of other places to work on this. So Do Square, James Davis, and Went to Ballot Initiative. It sounds like there was also maybe some pushback from a couple UMass or Mass General psychiatrists or physicians or somebody. One person I heard kind of got a lot
And
of.
we actually had a ton of support from medical professionals.
Why was this
We
other person's voice so much put to the front? Just because he's the only, protagonist? Oh, okay.
yeah, Dr. Dua. She's a vascular surgeon, nothing to do with psychedelics, not really in her lane whatsoever, but I think they just wanted, the doctor title. I spoke with her personally. I actually reached out to her before I even joined the campaign. Because she's a mom, she's got 2 small kids. She started a Democratic nonprofit with the admirable goal of getting healthcare professionals elected into positions of power so that they could, advocate for patients. And a lot of her beliefs, it just didn't fit. It didn't make sense to me that she would be against this. So I sort of reached out to her, like mom to mom, like this is my experience with my kid, like your kids are young, but like, I have this adult child who I know will benefit from these medicines. And I would love to just talk about, what your opposition is. So she and I had a lot of like honest conversation, which I thought was great. And her her issue with this was she had a sister with severe mental illness, I think maybe schizophrenia, and she was worried about these medicines falling into the wrong hands. Um, so I think I'm not sure who got to her or who inspired her to fight against this, but it was nothing in her medical background. She didn't object for any reasons other than honestly fear. Um, but as a doctor, her voice was powerful. I guess she wasn't. We never. They never put out much in terms of that. They didn't put out many ads. I honestly, I don't think they had to do much. Like I said, they had the war on drugs on their side and all that propaganda. Um, she wasn't super involved, and I would say we had overwhelming support from many, many medical professionals and mental health professionals all over the state and beyond.
You can
Um,
see it in a lot of places as well. There's seemingly a lot of support. You have these single people who want to hold on to a particular element of power, be the front runner for a conversation that's complex or controversial. Now that the measure has not passed, I believe in Massachusetts you have to wait 2 years before another ballot initiative happens. Is that correct, or is there a time delay you need to wait between measures?
yeah, I think it can't be until 2020. I think it's not, let me see. I don't know off the top of my head. It's more than two,
More than two
I
years,
think.
okay.
Yeah.
That's why you decided, okay, put that to the side. We're gonna go straight into the legislature. You're making sausage now. So tell me a little bit about that process. Sounds like you got
It's
10
been
bills.
really upsetting to see how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so after the failure of this ballot question, spent I was the community engagement director, and have a lot of actual power there. I had no ability to have input on the social media account, for example, which is how you really engage people in today's modern world, a important tool. Um, but I did spend a lot of time talking to a lot of people and just know that this did not fail because of the lack of support. And our exit polling numbers show that as well. More than half of people supported decrim in our exit poll. Um, 2/3 support therapeutic access. So the appetite is there. I think that people just didn't like the version that New Approach was selling, and that Dewey Square, the combination of the two, I think we just didn't do a good job of selling that to the public. But people want new tools. They support psychedelic access. There needs to be a little more work done to convince them um, to to support a measure, and it needs to be something different than this ballot question was too much. It had the therapeutic piece, it had it just was like confusing for people. So I
So you
wasn't going to give
were
up. I'm stubborn. I know this. I believe strongly that this is the future, um, and decided to just turn towards, whatever legislative action can happen. I don't have high hopes that much of what we got filed will go far, but I think it was important to me to reach out to lawmakers and basically say, people want this. They want something done, and let's see what we can make happen. So we worked really hard to convince lawmakers using the exit polling data to show there's an appetite for this still. Like, we need to do something, um, and we managed to get 10 new bills filed before the deadline, which was Friday.
Um, yeah, it's when you look at sort of the history, I guess like you're not just Massachusetts isn't just in and of itself. It's got all this stuff behind, and you look at the Oregon model, and people are having concerns around that and being able to be sustainable and the cost of taxpayers. And really, the only model on a state level that's working is the decrim in Colorado, because the legalization in Colorado still really hasn't or is just now getting implemented. So here you have 2+ years of decrim working pretty smoothly, and then yet somehow that's not brought forward or sort of emphasized in this process. Makes you always kind of a little bit wondering. But so you have 10 bills now, using this sort of polling data, you also know, which I think is unique, because now you know where all the different cities in the state, what their sensation or their feel was because of their voting process, with the Measure 4. So now you can, of course, sort of bring that into your legislatures. Uh, what kind of bills were they, first of all, and then also, like, how have you seen sort of the conversations as you're calling up these lawmakers and policymakers? Have they been supportive? Has the pushback been kind of in the normal areas that you expect, or what's kind of that relationship like?
I have been actually excited at what I've seen. I initially, the first person that I reached out to was Rep. Sabadosa, who had sponsored a previous statewide decrim bill, an act relative to plant medicine. So, and she had been very, vocally in support of the SM4 campaign as well. So I reached out to her first, and, I had seen a quote, the day after this passed of, her saying it set decrim back and, kind of negative. But once I was able to get her on the phone and kind of explain the reasons why, you know, I thought that this failed from, the inside knowledge and that polling data. Like when she started to hear that, it wasn't too hard to convince her that, something still needed to be done. I will say there was a lot of support when we reached out to people, but no one wanted to go for straight decrim. No one would refile an act relative to plant medicine or anything that was um, straight decrim, which is disappointing. We
Was that
did have a
like
few that were like decrim for qualifying conditions or, you know, removing criminal penalties and replacing them with um, civil fines, which is not great. Um, but no one would go for straight decrim, which is
what is there, I mean, because it's like, it seems like there is are people getting it that we're like talking about throwing people in jail for something that grows on the ground? Like, what's the disconnect there? It seems like it's such an easy, like, yeah, let's stop throwing people in jail. Like, why are they like excited about that or not willing to like move that forward?
don't know. That's something that I would really love to dig into. My background for the past 25 years has been in survey research and data collection. And I tried in the course of this campaign to say we need more than this polling data, like very simplistic polling data. Like we really, and I feel very strongly about this, need to throw more money into real world research and understanding, deeply understanding people's attitudes. And like like you said, there is this huge disconnect. It makes no sense. Um, but really getting some understanding of that and figuring out how to effectively message to people around it. Like, how do we sell the idea of decrim? Like, let's approach it like a business problem that we can solve, like, um, what are the most effective messages? That to me seems really, really important.
I mean, it'd be great for you. I mean, I don't know if you were able to do this, but to come up with, if someone's going to do polling, for you to make the questions. There's, for example, a poll here in California where they're like, oh, look, nobody really, and maybe we talked about this before, nobody really supports decrim over therapeutic. And the therapeutic was, do you think these substances should be used in a therapeutic manner, right? And then the decrim question was, do you think people 18 or over should have access to this plus home grow plus this? There's like 10 variables in one question. So if you
Right.
agree with one of the things, then you say no on all the rest of it, and that doesn't really help you sort of zoom in on what the actual issue is. But of course, the pollers are paid by the people who benefit from these more expensive systems, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we get like a grassroots polling organization going? Because I think that would be so interesting. Maybe you could
I'm
be.
super passionate about that, and it's something I've been dreaming and talking about doing for a long time. I have a close relationship with a company that I used to work for. I freelanced for them, and I worked for them full time. That has an amazing platform built on top of Qualtrics, which is the standard, and it allows for some really cool functionality that no one else is doing. And I see such a promise for advocacy. Two of the things I'm most excited about are the ability that it has is the ability to just, instead of open-ended questions where you have to type in your response, to just talk into your phone. You could talk for 5 minutes, and then AI and natural language processing like automatically transcribes it all, and then it's like searchable by keyword. Basically, it gives you um, really in-depth qualitative responses at quantitative scales, and that I just see so much promise for that. And then you have in people's own words them telling you about their experiences. That could be a powerful advocacy tool. It also has the ability to, like with the ballot language wording, for example, you could show a paragraph and people could just click on words or phrases that they don't like and just tell you why are they scared of this? What are they, um, anyway, I could nerd out on the
Yeah, no,
research piece of this for so long, but I have a vision of a dream of getting this really in-depth state level, usage awareness attitudes that we could use and replicating that all across the country. And there is a company called X and Y who's trying to do that. They're trying to get funding, and I reached out to them. We basically are sort of in the process of like, let's figure out if we can make this happen in Massachusetts, if we get it funded, and then replicate it across all 50 states. So that piece is really interesting to me.
yeah, I'd love to, if you ever want to, I'd love to jump in on it with that. I have another person who'll be on a podcast later on, I think next month or the end of the following month. Daniel Kruger used to work at University of Michigan, is at a University of Buffalo now. He's done a lot of grassroots naturalistic survey studies to see kind of where people are in terms of decrim and legalization and all these different types of sources. And Julie Barron out of Michigan as well. So it'd be great to kind of build a nice little coalition team of people that are really into this, because I think that's what's missing. Because all the people who do that, they say, well, the polls say this, and then this polls are gospel. We have to go by the polls. But if the polls are corrupt or they're asking questions in the wrong way, then the polls aren't really getting into it. And also, polling also is oftentimes before the education. When we
Right.
started for nature, everyone's like, "Oh, you can only do mushrooms." That's what the polling says. Well, have you taught anyone what ayahuasca and ibogaine and mescaline cacti are? You haven't? Okay, well then let's do that. And then, of course, as soon as you do that, it shifts again. It changes for people. So I think there's a lot there. So I know we're getting a little tight on time, but what of the 10 bills that you put in there you think has the strongest legs and you're most excited about?
Um, I mm, there's such a variety. I think there's a couple of research pilot studies. I'm excited about the New York sort of permit model
Mhm.
that we were able to get someone to introduce. I'm not sure what has the most legs. We'll see. Um, that remains to be seen. I think, who sponsors it, who supports it. I'm
Mhm.
not, we'll see.
And now
Um,
that you have a little extra time, you're ready to jump back into Boston and are working
yes.
together trying to
Yeah.
get the
So
documentation happening.
what's next? We wanted to get as much filed as we could, and we'll work to support that. But I'm really think what we need to do is focus on decrim. So we want to decrim all the cities that voted yes on four, starting with Boston, which is a seventh of the population of the state of Massachusetts. So we're going to work on that, and then chipping away at all these other communities. And yeah, I'm another thing back to the research piece and like bringing people together. I'm really excited to start trying to have conversations with advocates from other states, and I'm trying to form a Northeast alliance of grassroots advocates to sort of let's start talking on a monthly basis. Let's talk about the different policy. Let's figure out how we can share ideas and resources and maybe research. I just think we need to start sort of pooling our efforts and getting organized, and that we're stronger together. Also, personally, after this campaign failed, talking with other grassroots advocates, and in particular, one, a veteran, CJ LeConte, who was featured prominently in a lot of our ads and was a great volunteer and advocate. Him and I have teamed up to form a nonprofit, Mass Healing, and our mission is to, continue the advocacy piece, continue the public education and awareness piece that really needs to happen, but primarily focusing on how to expand access for people now. So, we have all these great decriminalized communities that we can, work with facilitators there, with retreat centers, psychedelic churches, and really helping to expand the numbers of people who have experienced, healing through these medicines to help, first and foremost, to help people get the relief that they need. And also, to help build an army of advocates, because when you've healed with these medicines, for the most part, it changes your life in such a dramatic way that you want to scream it from the rooftops so that people aren't doing that for Zoloft, I think we can really harness the powerful healing that comes, and have a lot of grassroots advocates willing to step up and make this happen, the next time a ballot question comes around. So,
And for people that are listening, if they're part of this Northeast corridor that you're speaking about, which states would they, if somebody's in these places, come reach out to you? Which states are you kind of bringing together in this coalition?
let's see, what are all the Northeast states?
Oh, pretty much.
Maine, yeah, just the Northeast. So actually, we'll talk to anyone. I had a long conversation with the Alaska team. They're interested, so they want to listen in. Like I think ultimately it would be great to
Is that
have.
Gina in Alaska?
I haven't spoken with Gina, but Naraya.
Okay.
Gina wasn't able to make that meeting, so she's the one person from that team that I haven't connected with yet. But there was interest in Minnesota. Someone reached out from Maryland, which isn't technically part of the Northeast, but it seems like, that there's a desire for people from states all over the country to kind of try to coalesce around this issue.
Great.
So yeah, we'll see. I think we can learn a lot from each other and help each other out. And yeah, I think getting organized in some way, would help us all.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Yeah, so it looks like we have one question and one comment. Let's jump on that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the interaction piece is huge. It's very hard. I've been trying to steer this child who's had a really traumatic medical history, towards psychedelic. That's what he wants to do. He's found a little bit of relief. He wants to have more big experiences, but it's really frustrating because there's not a lot of information out there when you're trying to taper off of this or that. And um it makes it hard to make an informed decision. I wish that there was more readily available to the public without having to pay. I understand people are trying to make a living as well, but I think the potential interactions, and how you navigate what you're already on versus there needs to be more, for people. Especially my son is on the one pharmaceutical that he still takes, is a relatively newer one called Obility. And it's been really frustrating because there's really no conversations around, which psychedelics are safe to interact with that newer medication.
Well, thank you,
Awesome.
Rachel. Appreciate it. Thank you to everyone that's listening. We appreciate you all being here. And yes, Jamie's bringing that warrior spirit in for sure, especially given what sounds like have been a very difficult few days of dealing with stomach flus and everything. So,
It's like
congratulations.
sweating through this whole thing. I'm like, am I just sweating or is it coming on? We'll see.
Shortage of everything
Yeah,
for the new year.
Yeah,
exactly.
so thank you for sharing your thoughts, both about your personal experiences and your healing, your treats and your microdosing. Thank you for talking about all the things that are going on in Massachusetts. Please, anyone that's out there that's working on policy that wants to reach out to Jamie and check in about either, what's the sort of strategy that works or doesn't work, or also new approaches here. What do we do? How do we sort of navigate that conversation? Please go ahead and reach out. I think Jamie will have some information. We'll put it in our little blurb for the podcast, to reach out and contact her. But really appreciate your time here today. Hopefully you'll continue to do amazing things out there in Massachusetts, and I look forward to working with you on Boston and trying to get something passed there locally, so we continue to make things happen in Massachusetts and keep growing there. So thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone, for being here. If you have any last words you'd like to say there, Jamie, before we sign off?
I just want to say thank you to you, Decriminalize Nature and all the resources that you had and provided for us when I reached out, thinking about decriminalizing Boston. super helpful. And that's kind of what I'm hoping. That's sort of my vision with connecting with all these Northeast advocates. Like, let's share the information, share the knowledge. Let's just, help each other out. And I think Decrim Nature has been an amazing example of sort of that knowledge sharing and spirit of cooperation that I think is going to get us far in this movement. So yeah, thanks to you for all you do, both of you.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Appreciate it. Thank you, Rachel, as well, for being here. But yeah, we'll keep moving it forward and keep chipping away little by little. I think we got some good things happening this year, so I'm excited to keep moving forward. So, thank you, everyone, for joining us at the Decriminalized Nature Restoring Our Roots podcast. Thank you for listening in. Continue to have a happy Sunday, and until next time, tune in, stay rooted, and let's grow together. Have a great night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Plant power to the people. Plant power to the